The notification didn't come with a siren. It arrived as a silent, automated ping on the federal judiciary's PACER system. Document 42, case number 2.26 CV0109. Most of Washington was asleep or at ceremonial brunches, observing President's Day. The federal docket was supposed to be dead, but inside the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, a digital bomb had just been detonated. This wasn't a standard stay order or a procedural delay. It was a 40-page judicial injunction that didn't just cite case law. It cited 1984. At the center of the document is United States District Judge Cynthia Rufe. She didn't just block an administrative action. She accused the executive branch of operationalizing George Orwell's Ministry of Truth. The forensic detail that matters here isn't the signature at the bottom, but the specific timestamp of the upload, a federal holiday honoring George Washington. At that exact moment, across the street from the Liberty Bell, National Park Service crews were reportedly prepping to sanitize the remaining placards at the president's house site. They had their orders: remove the references to the 9 enslaved people who lived there with Washington. But when document 42 hit the server, the chain of command shattered. This ruling triggers an immediate mechanical chain reaction. Within 6 minutes of the upload, the Department of Justice's Civil Division phones began lighting up. The order was absolute: restore the status quo. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a judicial mandate that stripped the administration of its self-proclaimed right to cleanse American history. Judge Rufe's text was devastatingly specific, as if the Ministry of Truth now existed with its motto, "Ignorance is strength." This court is now asked to determine whether the federal government has the power it claims to dissemble and disassemble historical truths. This is not a debate about a museum exhibit. You are watching the first live fire in a war over the ownership of reality. The administration's defense was that the government owns the message it displays. Judge Rufe's ruling declared that the government does not own the past. By the time the sun set on President's Day, the physical crowbars in Philadelphia had been lowered, but the legal mechanism for a total history rewrite had just been jammed by a George W. Bush appointee who refused to look away. The rewrite had begun in silence 3 weeks ago. The collapse of that strategy just happened in 40 pages of scorched earth. You need to understand that the removal of the Oney Judge panels wasn't an accident or a rogue park ranger's decision. It was the result of a meticulously constructed legal weapon aimed by 3 specific individuals who have been waiting for this moment. The first is Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. He's the public face, the loyal executive who signed the Restoring Truth and Sanity order, but he's just the signatory. The real architect is Gregory Byron, the DOJ's lead civil attorney for this case. Byron didn't argue about history in court. He argued about ownership. His premise was terrifyingly simple. Reality is a government asset. And then there is Jessica Boren, the acting director of the National Park Service. She is the silent enforcer, the bureaucrat who transmitted the order to the Philadelphia superintendents at 4 a.m. on a Sunday to ensure the crowbars were out before the press woke up. How did they get away with it for 3 weeks? They didn't break the law. They exploited a loophole rigged nearly 20 years ago. It's called the government speech doctrine. In 2009, the Supreme Court ruled in Pleasant Grove City versus Summum that a city could refuse to display a private group's monument because accepting it would distort the city's own message. Byron flipped this logic on its head. He argued that because the National Park Service is a federal voice, it has the absolute constitutional right to curate its own speech. By this logic, the history of slavery at the president's house isn't a fact. It's a viewpoint the government has chosen to deselect. This is the invisible architecture, a legal framework where the truth is optional if the government decides it's off-brand. We have seen this machinery before. This is echo number 1, the lost cause textbook campaigns of the 1920s. Just as the United Daughters of the Confederacy successfully lobbied to ban books that weren't sympathetic to the South, the current administration is using federal funding as a chokehold to sanitize national monuments. Echo number 2, the Soviet airbrush of 1937. Stalin didn't just kill his rivals, he removed them from photographs. The NPS removing the name of Hercules, Washington's enslaved chef, from the wall is the digital age equivalent of the ink eraser. Echo number 3, Rust v. Sullivan, 1991. The Supreme Court ruled the government could ban doctors and federally funded clinics from discussing abortion. Byron is using rust to argue that park rangers are just like those doctors, paid to speak only the approved script. But the scariest part isn't the legal argument. It's the anticipatory obedience. Most of the staff at Independence Hall didn't need to be threatened. When the memo dropped, middle managers began self-censoring emails and archiving controversial research voluntarily. They call it risk management, but it's actually silent compliance. It's the psychology of an institution that values its budget over its mandate. The gears turn not because they are forced to, but because friction is dangerous to a career. Judge Rufe didn't just stop a removal, she interrupted a trance. 1:15 p.m., February 17th, 2026. The Department of Justice, Conference Room 4B. The room is soundproofed, windowless, and cold. The air conditioning hums at a precise, sanitized frequency, designed to mask the sound of nervous breathing. This is where the narrative is supposed to be controlled, but right now, the narrative is bleeding out on the mahogany table. Three men are staring at a single tablet displaying Judge Rufe's order. On the left is Gregory Byron, the DOJ's legal architect. He is the ideologue. He doesn't look like a lawyer, he looks like a true believer. Veins visible in his neck, his posture rigid. He sees the law not as a set of rules, but as a weapon to be wielded for a specific cultural outcome. To him, the removal of the slavery panels wasn't vandalism, it was a correction. Opposite him is Marcus Vaughn, the senior advisor for domestic policy. Vaughn is the opportunist. He doesn't care about history. He cares about the midterms. He cares about the fact that CNN is currently running a split screen of the Liberty Bell and a shredded Oney Judge biography. He is the friction in the room, the cold splash of political reality against Byron's fever dream. She quoted Orwell, Greg, Vaughn says, his voice dangerously quiet. She didn't just vacate the order. She literally wrote "Ignorance is strength" into the federal record. Do you understand what that does to the appeal? You handed them a campaign slogan on a silver platter. Byron slams a hand on the table. It's judicial activism. We appeal to the Third Circuit. We argue national security. We argue that the executive branch has plenary power over federal property. We don't back down. If we put the panels back up, we admit that the Restoring Truth order was illegal. We admit defeat. We lost, Vaughn snaps, sliding a thin red folder across the table. And we didn't just lose in court. We lost in the dark. The evidence, the Ranger log leak. This is the turning point. The folder doesn't contain legal briefs. It contains a printout of an encrypted signal chat log from the night of the removal, dated January 22nd, 2026. This is what the press doesn't have yet, Vaughn says. But they will in about 20 minutes if we don't kill this story. The log isn't from a whistleblower in Washington. It's from the ground crew, the GS9 park rangers who were ordered to pry the panels off the wall. The log reveals a site assessment time-stamped 3:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the removal began. Ranger 1. The adhesive is industrial grade. If we pry these off, the brick veneer comes with it. We are damaging the structure. Command. DOJ relay. Proceed. Structural integrity is secondary to removal. Ranger 1. Confirming. You are ordering us to knowingly damage a federal archaeological site? Command. Proceed. Vaughn points at the highlighted text. That's a felony, Greg. That's a violation of the Antiquities Act. You didn't just order a curatorial change. You ordered the destruction of federal property to hide a political embarrassment. Judge Rufe suspects this. If she grants discovery, she gets these logs. And then we aren't fighting a civil suit. We are fighting criminal indictments for your staff. The friction peaks. The ideologue, Byron, looks at the log, his face pale. For the first time, the invisible architecture he built cracks. He realizes that his legal theory, that the government owns reality, has just run headfirst into a forensic fact. You cannot destroy a building without leaving a mark. The shift Vaughn leans in, his voice dropping to a whisper. We are not appealing. You are going to draft a statement saying the removal was a temporary preservation measure for winterization. You are going to say the damage was environmental. And then we're going to put the damn panels back up before the evening news cycle. Byron stares at him. That is a lie. Vaughn smiles, a cold, shark-like expression. It's not a lie, Greg. It's a realignment of the narrative. Isn't that what you wanted? The power shifts in silence. The ideologue has been castrated by the opportunist. The deep state isn't a unified monolith, it's a shark tank where the true believers get eaten by the survivors. The meeting ends not with a handshake, but with the sound of a single file being deleted. Join the intelligence circle. What you just saw, the logs, the leverage, the internal war, is the story the mainstream media is too afraid to tell. They show you the ruling. We show you the panic in the room. If you want the full, uncensored Ranger logs and the leaked strategy memo that proves they planned this for months, click the link below. Subscribe now to enter the intelligence circle. You aren't just watching a documentary, you are building the case file. The war for the narrative didn't stay inside the soundproofed walls of the DOJ. By the morning of February 18th, the internal breach had become a global hemorrhage. It started not in Philadelphia, but in Paris. At 09:00 CET, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee issued an unprecedented level red alert for Independence Hall. Usually reserved for war zones like Palmyra or Kiev, this designation signaled that a World Heritage Site was under imminent threat of state-sponsored distortion. This is the global ripple effect. The administration thought they were fighting a local zoning skirmish. Instead, they triggered a diplomatic crisis. The French and German ambassadors were suddenly asking the State Department why the United States was purging its own founding documents. The sanitization of Oney Judge wasn't just a domestic policy shift. It was being read abroad as the first step in a totalitarian slide, and the international press was running with it. This collapse is driven by three specific factors, and the first is institutional betrayal. The administration assumed the National Park Service was a monolith of federal employees who would follow orders. They were wrong. They forgot that park rangers are historians first and bureaucrats second. The ranger logs didn't just leak, they were weaponized. Across the country, at sites from Gettysburg to Manzanar, rangers began a campaign of malicious compliance. They didn't strike. They followed every order to the letter, slowing the restoration process to a crawl by filing thousands of pages of mandatory environmental impact reports for every single screw that needed to be turned. The bureaucracy the administration tried to use as a weapon was turned into a shield by the very people they tried to silence. The second factor is legal encirclement. Judge Rufe's order was the breach in the dam, and now the floodwaters are rising. Within 48 hours of the ignorance is strength ruling, a coalition of 19 state attorneys general filed amicus briefs not just supporting the ruling, but expanding it. They're using Rufe's logic to challenge patriotic education mandates in Florida, Texas, and Idaho. The administration is no longer fighting one judge in Pennsylvania. They are fighting a multi-front legal war they simply do not have the manpower to sustain. The government speech doctrine, their golden ticket to rewriting reality, is being dismantled court by court, cited as a violation of the public trust doctrine. The Department of Justice is now encircled by its own precedent, forced to defend the indefensible in a dozen jurisdictions simultaneously. The third and most devastating factor is mathematical inevitability, also known as the Streisand effect. By trying to erase Oney Judge, they made her the most famous enslaved woman in American history. Search traffic for Oney Judge escape spiked 4,000% globally in the 3 days following the ruling. The administration's attempt to control the algorithm failed because the algorithm feeds on conflict. Every time a spokesperson denied the removal, the engagement metrics doubled. They are fighting a mathematical war they cannot win. The more they try to bury the story, the more the digital ecosystem excavates it. What is terrifying for the White House isn't the noise from the streets. It is the strategic silence of their opponents. This is political Aikido in its purest form. The opposition leaders, governors, historians, the descendants of the enslaved aren't screaming. They aren't holding chaotic protests that can be spun as riots. They are simply reading the judge's order aloud. Governor Shapiro didn't give a speech. He just posted a screenshot of page 12 where the judge quotes Orwell with no caption. They are using the administration's own overreach, its own weight, to pull it to the ground. They are letting the silence of the shredded document scream louder than any megaphone. The administration is punching at ghosts, and every swing just tightens the noose of public opinion. What you are witnessing right now isn't a retreat. It is a tactical reconfiguration. Based on the internal memos and the pattern of behavior we have analyzed, the administration has initiated a 3-stage contingency plan to survive the next 30 days. Stage 1, the administrative coma. Days 1 to 7. They will not appeal immediately. Instead, they will file a motion for clarification, asking Judge Rufe to define historical integrity in a way that allows them to stall. The goal is to keep the panels off the wall until the news cycle dies. They will cite vandalism concerns or weatherproofing as a pretext to keep the site boarded up. The survival probability for this stage is 40%. It buys time, but it bleeds credibility every hour the site remains closed. If the public pressure holds, they trigger stage 2, the sacrificial firewall, days 820. This is where the opportunist, Marcus Vaughn, wins. They will cut the limb to save the body. Watch for the sudden resignation of acting director Jessica Boren. She will be framed as a rogue actor who misinterpreted the Restoring Truth order. They will throw her to the wolves, claim the administration loves history, and quietly reinstate a revised version of the panels that is 20% less accusatory. They will try to settle the lawsuit by blaming a subordinate. The survival probability here drops to 25% because the ranger logs prove the orders came from the top. A sacrifice only works if the paper trail stops at the victim. In this case, the trail goes all the way to the Attorney General's office. If the leaks continue, we enter stage 3, the scorched earth distraction, days 2130. This is the most dangerous phase. If they cannot control the narrative of the past, they will detonate a crisis in the present to blind you. Expect a sudden high-decibel conflict, a border closure, a trade war escalation, or a fabricated intelligence leak about a foreign threat designed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. They will try to make you forget Oney Judge by making you fear for your own safety. The survival probability for the truth in this stage is less than 10%. If they successfully pivot the national conversation to national security, the Liberty Bell becomes a footnote, and the history is rewritten while you are looking at the explosion they just set off. Here is your 48-hour ultimatum. Do not watch the White House press secretary. Watch the Federal Register. Look for a filing under Department of the Interior Personnel Management. Specifically, watch for the reassignment of the Philadelphia Regional Superintendent. If he is moved or fired by Friday at 5 p.m., Stage 2 has begun. If the Department of Justice files an emergency stay with the Third Circuit citing national security regarding the park's operation, Stage 3 is live. You are not just a spectator anymore. You are a witness to a crime scene where the victim is memory itself. The government believes that if they chip the name of a slave off a wall, she ceases to exist. They believe that reality is something they can edit in post-production. But they forgot the lesson Oney Judge taught George Washington 230 years ago. You can own the law, you can own the house, and you can own the shackles, but you cannot own the person who decides to walk away. The truth has already escaped the plantation. The only question left is whether you have the courage to help it run.